All right, everybody, welcome to episode number 23, the GOAT number episode 23, Michael
Mm-hmm.
Jordan. I mean, he's my
MJ.
GOAT of Beyond the Court. And, before we get started, Ellie and I are super excited. Scotty Mac, we just want to say thank you so much to our first official advertiser, our first official sponsor, KWM Gutterman. Many of us in the racquetball world know him as Keith Miner. Keith, you are an absolute angel, literally, for racquetball. You do so much. You're keeping us going. You're keeping me going. We really, really appreciate it. And without you, there's a lot of things in racquetball that don't happen. And now you are part of the Beyond the Court family, and we greatly appreciate that. Scotty Mac's going to leave your logo up there because you deserve it, and we'll talk about that later on for other advertisers. But again, KWM Gutterman, Keith Miner, thank you so much. You are the first official advertiser, sponsor, supporter of the Beyond the Court show. So we appreciate that. With that, tonight's guest, Ellie, it's the Restrung Magazine guy. It is Freddie Ramirez. Freddie has a lot of opinions. He's got a lot to say. He's been taking pictures for over 10 years on all the tours, and he has a lot of opinions on indoor, outdoor, the professional tours, the associations, the organizations. And I talk to Freddie a lot, and one of the things he says is he's not afraid to own whatever it is that he writes. And I know you've been reading up on a lot of the stuff he's been writing lately, Ellie.
Yeah, I sure have. I've known Freddie for a little while now. Got to know him a little bit at the outdoor game. When New York One Wallers started coming out to Huntington Beach for the World Championships, the Outdoor Nationals. So, Freddie, fun guy, very likable, very fun to talk racquetball with the whole time. Get different perspective, that outdoor perspective, that New York feel. And just talk racquetball with him. I've had time with him on the indoor court, trying to kind of get him to hit some backhands while we play some doubles. But, and he's created Restrung Magazine, and we were all wondering about the name and, what's going on with it. And we read articles, and now a number of years later, he's quite outspoken in the sport. And, we need that right now. We need some opinions and some thoughts on how to advance our sport, how to continue to try to grow our sport, to save our sport, to save our courts. And we'll get some good conversation with Freddie, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, Ellie, that's well said. And, you never know what my monologue is going to be, but you just kind of led me right into that. And, here it is. Racquetball is at a very crucial point in our history. Decisions from organizations from here on out might ultimately pave the way as to where we will go. The pro tours, the associations, the organizations, the leaders are going to play the most vital role in our future. I believe they all need to work together, and they need to come up with a direction, a vision that's in the best interest of the sport. I don't care if that's indoor or outdoor. The decisions, those visions, they need to be for racquetball, not for themselves, not for their individual tours. Players play. We're going to compete. We're always going to do that. If it's there, as long as the stage is set, we'll be there. If I'm a coach, I'll be there coaching one of those players. But, there are plenty of people that talk a big game. There's a lot of talkers out there, a lot of yappers, and they don't do. And, it just so happens, a guy like Keith Miner is a doer. He just does it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need. There's no more time for talk. I'm sorry. Racquetball needs the people that get it done. And it's time to do that. So we're going to have our guest here who definitely has a lot to say. He has a lot to write. He has a lot to photograph and video. And right after this commercial, we're going to see what Freddie Ramirez has to say. So stay right there. All right, we're live here with Freddie Ramirez, another racquetball family member, an indoor out there family member. But before we continue, just want to pass condolences to Barry Joyner's family. He's another racquetball family member that we lost too early this past week. So condolences to him. Barry was a good guy, always there, ready to ref, and did it well. Ellie, I know you've dealt with him, but Freddie, just want to welcome you also. Thanks for coming tonight, Freddie.
Oh man, thanks for having me. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing
Freddie,
great, Freddie. It's good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you.
we're doing well. When we said you were coming on, there was a lot of whispering going on. I got a lot of texts.
Oh
Ellie
really?
got a lot of messages. Everybody's reading the stuff you're putting out there. You
Right.
are heard. You are heard. Uh, I like it. I read it. Ellie reads it. We go back and forth, and it's great to have you. But I do have a question. First question, because I do know you're an outdoor paddleball guy, like originally. How did you come up with the name? And tell us a little bit about Restrung Magazine.
Wow. Oh, okay. Well, initially when I was thinking about the name Restrung, I mean, like you take a racket, right? You own a racket, right? So it's like you buy it, it's strung, right? But what happens when the strings break? Well, it's like you take the racket, you restring it, you have pretty much a new racket, right? Something maybe has a different feel or whatever. So I kind of like use the name to kind of be able to talk about things like racquetball and squash and kind of like look at it little differently. So, I mean, it's just something that came to me. I started doing Restrung, I think like the initial idea was like in 2008 or 2009. I got into, well, let me talk a little bit about how I got into racquetball really quickly. Like you said, I grew up playing paddleball. I started playing one wall racquetball in 97. And I remember 98, there was like the first tournament that we had like in New York City. And I didn't like have a partner. So I called Robert Sastry. It was kind of like I called him the night before. He hadn't played one wall racquetball at all. He picked up a racket. We won the tournament, and then we just like kept on playing, right? So it's like a few years pass, and Ruben's playing with us, a couple of indoor guys like Shy and Fabian. He's an East Coast guy who used to play a lot outdoors. And 2004 rolls around, and Hank is kind of like putting things together with WOR. And that's actually, I think, the first time you and I met, Sudsy, was in 2004 in Huntington, and not in Huntington, in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And
Garfield,
that's,
yep.
yeah, that was kind of like my introduction to like the world of outdoor, meeting other players from like California. That year we went out to our first tournament in the last year Golden West. We ended up playing, and then like I had been playing all the time. But what I started doing was I was taking a lot of photos outdoors, right? So I was taking all these photos from the outdoor courts and all the outdoor tournaments and stuff. And then I had this idea for the magazine, but initially the idea was more for just like a magazine, right? Restrung. And I would talk about kind of like racket sports, squash, kind of like an all-in-one, right? All these racket sports, tennis, it could be about anything. Um, but it didn't work out that way because I remember that year there was something going on between the organizations and like the other photographers. There was like a lawsuit or something going on for like photo rights, right? And this is something that we've had problems with throughout the sport, for as long as I can remember, right? And I remember Jason coming up to me, Jason Menino, your boy, right? He comes up to me and goes, "Hey, how would you like to take pictures at nationals, right? Indoor." It's like I had never taken pictures before, and I was like, "Well, I mean, I've never done it before. Do you, He was like, "Oh, you'll be fine," and the rest is history. It's like I started kind of like just doing that, and then just being around the sport so much. I mean, I became a fan, right? It's like I got to know some of the players initially from the outdoor courts, but like watching racquetball initially without playing it. I mean, I tried it in college and stuff, and I played it a little bit, but that for me, cemented me as like a fan, right? And I mean, that's how I started. And since then, it's just been kind of like,
I
between
think
all
I think we're gonna have a lot of questions about, your all around awareness of the game and involvement in the game from the indoor side, both tours and all that. But I'm curious, Freddie, and we've had conversations about your beginnings in outdoor one wall racquetball. But you mentioned the mid '90s there that was the first tournament, maybe the first tournament you were in. But there's a history there in New York of paddleball. I know because I've met Anthony Fiorino. I've met some of the guys through Sudsy and Jason that played paddleball and rolled into a little racquetball indoors. So
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what you kind of came into when you first started playing racquetball, whether it's one wall racquetball, where the locations were in New York, and the feel and the vibe about it as it was, I assume, kind of sharing the sports of paddleball, racquetball, maybe even some handball.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. Paddleball was really big in New York for a while, right? So like in the 70s and the 80s, it kind of like ruled the boroughs, right? Budweiser was a big sponsor, and they would throw yearly tournaments where they would have these events in each borough. And then it's like the champs from each borough would go, and then they would play in these big tournaments. And it was a citywide thing. And at the time, there was no social media or anything. So it was a big deal in the parks. As the game started to die out a little bit, like in like the early 90s, people started aging out. And I remember it's like I was always a so-so paddleball player. I mean, it's like I would do tournaments. I'd maybe make a quarters, maybe make semis or something like that. Guy like Rob was like at the top of the game or whatever. But I remember playing that, and then like at the end of the day, there would be a couple of guys at the end of the at like this park that I played at in the village. They had 5 courts, and on one of the courts there'd be a bunch of guys playing, old paddleball players who would be playing racquetball, and they would call me out. So I eventually bought like a $30 racket, like a Wilson racket, and I remember loving that thing. I bought it like at Modell's, and I started playing, and I found out I was more apt to using a racket than I was a paddle, maybe because of the weight or the strength or whatever, maybe speed. But for New Yorkers, people were starting to age out a little bit with paddleball. I mean, at the time, the game was the little hardball. So people started transitioning a little bit more. And then by like 2000, 2001, almost everyone that plays paddleball now was playing one wall racquetball. And for a while in New York, one wall racquetball was the game, and paddleball had almost died out. Paddleball's made a bit of a resurgence over the last 5 years here. I think it's because they transitioned to the big racquetball, and that kind of like makes it easier for the older players to play, and makes it easier for the handball guys to come in, and those guys are like, you know, tremendous athletes.
Right.
So it's been making kind of like a resurgence, but that's to say that that has like cemented like a solid kind of like group of players in New York, and you can find them in every borough. So
Freddie,
when,
let me ask you, you keep saying transition, right? Like you're talking about how paddleball, that's interesting. They transitioned out of that into one wall racquetball. Now nobody's hiding from the fact that you're primarily or were born into racket sports outdoors.
right.
Okay. So we see that, and let's get the elephant in the room right out. We see that happening right now with
Mhm.
racquetball. A lot of racquetball, indoor racquetball players
Mhm.
are transitioning to outdoor, right? I mean, we all know this is a huge topic.
Right.
So, or at least they're trying it for the first time.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? What's going on? What do you think the powers to be can actually do to make sure we keep a lot of those indoor players not only playing outdoor? I think they should do both, quite
Right.
frankly.
Right.
So, but you touch on what you saw paddleball, how that happened, and maybe how you could have helped it, or how the paddleball associations could have helped it at the time.
Well, I mean, the paddleball associations, at the time there weren't any. I mean, this paddleball was kind of like dying out in New York City. I think that's kind of why one wall racquetball kind of like came into being in a big way in New York, because it kind of like it allowed people who were playing something to find somewhere else to go, and it was easier because it was easier on the body and stuff like that. But when you talk about what organizations or people should be doing to get people involved. There are two things you have to ask. And one of them is like, who's responsible for that, right? So, it's like, let's get to the topic right away, early, right? Let's talk about USA Racquetball, right? So, is it their job? First of all, it's a question. Is it their job, right? What's their job? I mean, I didn't, I've always assumed that it was their job to be kind of like the ones facilitating for racquetball as a whole. But then it becomes ambiguous, right? It's like, well, whatever. Um, because racquetball is a sport, is an indoor sport, right? Um, so is it their job? Well, I mean, if you think about them trying to grow the sport, yeah, I think anytime they could kind of facilitate for people to actually own a racket and play a racket, there's always a way to transition them to indoors. Whose job is it? I don't know. People are transitioning because of necessity this year. And this year would have been a really good year for USA to do it. I mean, there's a lot of different things we can talk about where that's concerned. I mean, I could talk about like what I thought they should be doing, but then again, it's just me thinking that because everyone has ideas on what they should be doing, right? When you look at it from someone like me, who comes into the sport like non-traditionally, right? It's like I see the guys off, right? So it's like for me, I'm a fan of King. I never played with King, right? So guys I play with outdoors are guys that I know, right? So it's a different thing for me, right? So how do you get someone like me to play indoor racquetball? Well, you got to put a racket in my hand and you've got to give me a reason to go there. This year would have been a perfect time for them to say, okay, we spent X amount of time kind of like on these indoor events and facilitating those things. But how, like at a certain point, you can only wait so long, right? And you have like this constituency that already has rackets, right? So you find out, hey, who has access, right? And you go after the people that you already have and you start a dialogue. What are they doing? Right? What are they doing? Do they even have access to the courts? And you start aggregating this information and you start facilitating, right? So it's like at some point, you got to stop looking at what you're waiting to happen and you have to be proactive and you have to keep the engagement up. I mean, the temperature, I think, of the constituency of USA Racquetball probably would have been so much more inclined to like jump on board had they been kind of like uh, in it with them during this time. It's like, yeah, I understand you don't have access, but do you have access? Let's start there. What access do you have? Who has access? All right, let's start talking about, okay, what can we do to lift up those members who are actually in that point where they're transitioning, right? So some guy in Oregon, right? I don't know, right? Doesn't have courts, right? But now they don't have any other option but to try playing outdoor, right? Well, I think it's their job to figure out who these people are and help them, right? It's like if they're engaging in this, find out who they are, right? And then lift them up on your platform. Hey, this guy over here in Oregon is playing, he's playing 3-wall. Why don't you try it, right? Do the same thing to some guy in Michigan, do the same thing to some guy in Florida, do the same thing, just spend that time getting to know who's doing what and lift that up and then try to figure out what you have there. And that's going to tell you where you're going to go with it, right? Instead of just kind of like waiting around. So if you talk about like people transitioning from, not having something to play and then they're playing something and then there's like, how, as an organization, how do you facilitate something like that, right?
Freddie, let me say something real quick here because this COVID, this situation and problem, if you want to call it a problem, existed before COVID. It's been existing for quite a while. I've been a part of an indoor lifestyle and growing up indoor racquetball and then deciding to play outdoor racquetball, being introduced to it. I guess, I sought it out. I knew about it and deciding to get involved to the point where I'm running the War Champs for a couple of years, where I'm, where you and I are getting, we're on the court hitting around, we're playing, we're thinking, we might have to play each other or play with each other.
Mhm.
And different racquetball circles crossing the indoor, the one wall, the outdoor 3 wall of Huntington Beach and other areas crossing paths. And so it took COVID for it to really get in people's mindset now. So now we're talking about it a little bit more, and to the point of USA Racquetball. So, then we bring in USA Racquetball and say, well, shouldn't they have been doing something more about it? Shouldn't they have been building up towards the Las Vegas event, towards, figuring out how to get more indoor players to realize that they do have walls and courts somewhere nearby, whether it's in their city and parks or somewhere. You got, figuring out something, ways to get leadership there, but they're so connected to indoor, and specifically through the United States Olympic movement, through the world, the worldwide Olympic movement, that it seems that their focus is there. Do you think that's a hindrance towards this situation? Or is it staffing, or is there, can we say a couple other things, and there's been rollover of different people who are now, with the company in the positions?
Well,
How does it actually happen though? Like, how do you get more proactive people to actually take people who never play indoor to the outdoor courts and start playing outdoor racquetball with them and teaching them what to do?
right. Well, I mean, there are two ways to look at it, right? What they should have been doing all this time, right? And that's something totally different than what I believe they should have been doing this year, right? I remember 2004. I'm going to say Hank's name a lot because I gotta give it to Hank. I mean, you guys know Hank better than
We're
I do.
we're
Right?
we're gonna have Hank on the show. I spoke to him, and he's absolutely Hank Marcus will be on the show
Oh, that's
uh,
fantastic.
in
I
the
mean,
next couple months.
yeah. I mean, Hank set the blueprint, right, on how to engage people, you know, to try outdoor, right? I mean, we went through all these campaigns. I remember, with Echelon. I mean, I remember you from Echelon too, Ellie. I mean, we had some time there too, um, where he was actively engaging people indoor and talking to them during indoor events, right? And kind of like pushing it. We had T-shirts, try it. It wasn't anything like we kind of knew it wasn't anything that was going to replace indoor. And I'll say this again, like I'm not a big believer in in outdoor racquetball becoming the savior of racquetball. I'm under no illusion. They're apples and oranges where I'm concerned.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
But where USA, or someone like USA is concerned, I mean, it's like, okay, before COVID, I think, it was in their best interest to keep, people engaged. Don't Some people might argue, well, there might be a direct competitor, maybe not. But the idea is that you have to understand is that a lot of their constituents were playing, and it is a viable alternative to using racquetball recreatively, right? So they should have. I mean, they have been there. There have been years where WOR and USA Racquetball have had uh, operational agreements where, like say, if you join WOR, you got a membership to USAR and you got the magazine and stuff like that. And, that was fine. I think under those circumstances, normal circumstances, there really wasn't much to do other than kind of like be a supporter, right? Because eventually those players could turn around and end up at a USA Racquetball an event, right? So that's your constituency. This year, however, I think, they had an opportunity to understand that there was nothing that they could do, right? Aside from maybe keep the lines of communication open with their constituency, with each other and the clubs, right? It's like, okay, you can only ask a club how many times, hey, what's your status? Are you opening up? It's not going to open up, right? So what do? Well, you stay engaged with your constituency, right? You send out those emails, you send out those questionnaires, you aggregate a group who has like access or who are like, informing you that they are starting to play regularly outdoor. And then you keep that dialogue open by asking them to share that with you, right? You're facilitating this group that plays this sport that you're supposed to be lifting up. Lift up those players, right? It's like this guy over in Oregon has a group of 10 people they're playing. that in turn will, it could, right? This is all argumentative, right? It could inspire somebody from Texas to say, hey, contact USAR. Hey, we got 20 guys that show up on Sunday over here at this court, right? Then you email them back, send us a photo, send us some videos, keep everybody engaged. I honestly think this could have been a year where, they could have kind of, at least facilitated like membership drives that way, kind of kept the ball rolling, and then also let them know that's like, hey, look, we're working for you in this capacity. It's either that
Freddie,
or change a model 100%.
Freddie, the outdoor players, the outdoor players that you're familiar with that are primarily outdoor players.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they would embrace indoor also and want to come play indoor? Do you think they're locked in? And Ellie, I know you have obviously a lot of experience with that too. Whereas I'm an indoor player, right? Born and bred, I'm
Right.
all about the indoor.
Right.
But yeah, I'll go do the outdoor thing. I did it a couple times. I enjoyed it. I might do it again.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, like a true outdoor player, do you think we're getting them inside?
Well, yeah, I've seen it happen. I mean, look at Rob, right? So Rob's a guy who grew up playing handball and paddleball, right? I'm going to say his name a lot, not because
he's a goat.
He's a goat. He's probably one of the reasons why I'm doing this too. It's like if I hadn't played with him, I probably wouldn't be doing this. But look at him. I mean, he's a guy who grew up in New York City, played nothing but handball and paddleball his whole life, right? Started playing, became one of the best one-wall athletes on the planet, bar none. Handball, paddleball, racquetball, right? And a few years ago, he was like, okay, I'm going to play some indoor tournaments. So he goes in and he plays, what's he playing? Opens, A's. This is a guy who's like, should be in like every Hall of Fame one wall has to offer, right? But this is a guy who then will go and he'll play indoor tournaments. And if he's doing it, there's always a possibility. I mean, there's always a possibility of pulling me in to play, right? I haven't played an indoor tournament, but Ellie, you've talked to me about playing indoor tournaments.
Sure, we've played a little indoor.
We've played a little indoor, right? And it's like, I remember us being on the court and you saying, hey, look, you just go in the front, you hit everything off the wall and I got everything in the back. That made perfect sense to me because it's like the wall's right in front of me. Jason Dorner, he's another one. We talked about maybe, playing, age division at nationals just to like, get me in. There's always that possibility. And even if there isn't, there's still a possibility to gain a constituency, right? It's like, hey, look, USA Racquetball, if they were interested in me, just me in what I'm doing, I might consider, being a member just to be a member because, they're lifting my group up, or if they've done something nice for someone in my group who,
Are you saying that USA Racquetball, you don't think they're interested in you as an outdoor player, but aren't they, like Vic Lebowski put online, he said that WOR was purchased by USA Racquetball.
Right.
So are you saying, are you implying that they're not worried about the outdoor?
Well, I don't know. Why did they purchase WR? I mean, naturally. Okay. So, I mean, this is all speculative. And when you have an Ank on, you can ask him. That's one of the questions why, like, that's a question I would ask him too, right? Why did you sell? Well, maybe it's time, right? And he saw an opportunity. And why did they buy? Well, they saw an opportunity maybe just to grab a group that's already kind of been aggregated. He's done all this work, right? But what do you do with it? Well, I don't know. It's a good opportunity. We have an opportunity to buy it, but we got to figure it out, right? So they do. But they hold on to it, and it's like they don't, like they've had like a couple of years to kind of like think what they wanted to do with WOR. And, he left a pattern. He left a group of people who were very invested. I mean, you got Big Daddy, you got Vic, you got Mike Coulter, just to name a few guys. I mean, it's like I could leave out a whole slew of people who have broken their backs for WOR, right? So I'm sure at some point, USAR has gotten them engaged in some conversation. But when does the conversation actually turn into kind of like, okay, are they still WOR, or are they still, or are they just taking WOR WOR for the infrastructure and then working it. Well, they didn't do that. So what is WR? Is WR a thing? I think that's one of the reasons why I became like really interested in it, because I'm vested in WOR, right? I put in a lot of work with WOR. You know,
What
it's
kind of
been,
work? What kind of work?
well, I mean, just, it's like I've worked with a lot of tournament directors. It's like when it comes to racquetball, I've worked with just about everybody, whether it's photography stuff, whether it's just like behind the scenes, kind of like helping with, organizational issues or player issues. I mean, especially in outdoor, because outdoor, there's a lot of kind of like, you have two sets, people who play outdoor, so they have their own rules. And then you have the indoor guys who come in, and depending on how good they are, right? Not the super top guys, but like the guys who are like at that level, that open level, they come out, they go to the court and they try it. And because they're not used to the rules, they're like, oh, this is stupid. Or they expect the rules to kind of like, adjust to them. Right. I've dealt with a lot of issues where that's concerned, over the years in tournaments, just dealing with that stuff.
Mediating,
So
you're mediating some player
yeah,
situations.
I
It's
mean,
out
but
there,
I'm not the only one. We had guys like Greg.
Sure.
We had,
Sure.
so I mean, there's a bunch
It's
of guys
spread
like
out.
that.
I dealt with it as a tournament director when you have players coming from Michigan, from Florida, from New York, coming to Huntington Beach, and then you have your own Huntington Beach SoCal crew, the Orange County crew there that, you see their setup back in the day at the tournament itself. It was like a little house back there, next to the grill for the guys and everything.
Sure.
And it's, it was like almost territorial around the court. So it's different. There's you have to be able to massage some attitudes out there to get everyone to understand and work together that we're trying to have a great tournament here. And that's interesting. You guys, the interesting point for me is there's definitely groups that transition from indoor to outdoor, and there's been new groups that have been brought to light over the last 15 years. I know NorCal's got a group here that's, Bill George has done a lot and other people are involved now. And it's transpired into more and more outdoor players that are going to Vegas, players that, play some indoor events. They're indoor players, but now they're becoming a little bit of both, or a lot of both. And so that exists all over the country and everything. But then there's the other side of it where you have players say, no, I'm only indoor. I can't try outdoor. Maybe my body's going to break down, which they don't realize it's the opposite. Actually, you can last longer in outdoor, the way you play the game. Those walls create a lot of problems with the hips and the knees and turning and doing a lot of stuff. That floor there makes you want to dive a little more indoors than it does outdoor. Where you have the outdoor players, like, hell no, I'm not going inside. I'm not paying for a membership. I'm not doing that. So there's this disconnect between the players that does somewhat exist still, although I think it's better than it's ever been, especially right now in COVID, when indoor players have to go outside and find the courts that exist. But the real issue is, we're, back to the, well, who, how can you get some people to work on really getting more players? So I'm somebody who thinks, you guys said it's apples, oranges, indoors kind of always going to be racquetball. I don't totally agree. And I don't totally disagree. Of course, I'm always going to be an indoor guy, so that indoor feels there. But I believe it's easier in cities, in a lot of towns across the country too, to get rackets in hands of kids and adults who've never played before, or have not played in a long time, and kids' sakes never played, and get them to a free court on a park. Now, there's a lot of parks that don't exist. So, how, again, we're back to USA Racquetball. Are they really responsible for that? Or is it, hey, why aren't the pro tours thinking about doing this more? Why, it's a tough call here.
Well, it depends on what the next steps are and why, right? It's like, if you're trying to get rackets into kids' hands, what's the next step, right? You can't just offer a kid a racket and say, here, go try the game, right? Unless you're wanting to facilitate that kid being able to take what you give him and do it somewhere else. I mean, squash has a really good track record where stuff like that is concerned. But USA, again, it's like apples and oranges. What's their mandate, right? So who's in charge? Or better yet, what's the goal, right? Is the goal is this year for USA to just kind of maintain, then outdoor would have been the way to do it, right? If you're not going to maintain and maintain people playing where they can play it and keep them engaged and keep them, facilitating your bottom line, right? Because if you keep them active, you have more of an opportunity to raise money that way, right? It's like they're more apt to, to donate rather than just kind of like wait for an event. Or you can get those guys to actually start their own events, right? It's like, and then you give them a little light on your platform, who won that, who did that, make them feel like they're a part of the organization. And believe me, something like that goes a really long way. And this was the year to do it. If they wanted to maintain what they were doing and they couldn't do that, then this was a way to do it. Otherwise, they need a whole new business plan, right? It's like, and this is something that's been discussed with them before, I know in the past, maybe a national center or something like that. And, I think that works in terms of something that they should look at, right? With the clubs dying out, you need a place to showcase what it could be, right? So if I'm a prospective club builder and I'm thinking about having some courts, well, what could a court look like? Well, a national center would be really nice, right? You have like 10 major courts, you trick them out the way that the squash guys do, with the with the Funwood ball tech. So, like say someone like Sudsy could, virtually do something for like a group in Texas, right? And, work with them that way on the court, but then again, before you take that first step, you have to know where you want to go with it. So when you buy WOR, you got to know, are you going to maintain WOR? If you're maintaining WOR, who's the person that's doing that? Is it still going to be WOR, or is it going to be USA Racquetball Outdoor, right? Either way, you got to figure out what that's going to be. Otherwise, you just buy and you put it on a shelf, and it's like, for me, I took that a little personally because it's like, I spent a lot of time playing. Um, Being in the Hall of Fame for me is a really big deal. So I take that very, very personally, especially with the group that I'm with. It's like, if anyone, so for me, WOR is a really important piece to it. And that's where all my initial questions came from.
So you guys were both in Vegas, though. I mean, is war on people's lips? I mean, are they talking about it? Are they wondering these things that we're questioning, or does it
When,
feel like it's already slipped into?
well, when do you hear war? You hear outdoor, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
that's right.
I saw the WR logo during the three world championships. But that was it. I mean, if that's the case, then do that, right? But use the people that, it might be a little too late for that, because a lot of those people are burnt, you know, not that I would include myself, but there are a lot of people who are just kind of like, fed up,
Sure.
with just kind of like waiting, or 2-hour conference calls with like 10 people on the line, and then 2 weeks later nothing happens. It's like, I I don't want to vilify USAR. I never did. Like, if I see like they do some really good things, there are some really good people at USAR. I've had some really good dialogue, but the problem happens when 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 the conversation is genuine, or rather than just a conversation that you have to have for the moment, right? And you say the things that you want to say just to get you out of that conversation. Yeah, we push it off. But at the end of the day, where you spend your money and your time is a very clear indicator of what your priorities are, right? So, like, you guys spend a lot of time on this show, right? You spend a lot of time talking about racquetball, right? You spend a lot of time kind of like thinking about, okay, who are the guys we should be talking about, right? Well, they should be doing the same thing, right? Especially when you don't have something to do, right? Because you're waiting. And that's my only point.
That was your article a couple weeks ago. That was the article
Well,
in a nutshell, really. I mean, that's I got a lot out. That's what I got out of that a lot of ways. And you use Sudsy as just an example, and use Kane as an example a little bit as well. But
right,
it was interesting, yeah. And it was,
right.
a lot of us read that, go, yeah, this is right. The opportunities kind of passed, and we're still in COVID, so it's not past, but it's
Well, it depends. Where do they see themselves next year, right?
yeah,
If they're looking at, you know, again, you know, the opinions are like, you know, excuse my French, they're like assholes. Everybody has one, right?
Yep.
But, you know, knowing a little bit
Is
about
that
what I
confirmed that
know,
everybody has one though? Is that
I
like
don't
a
know.
medical confirmation?
I don't know. When I have a
You
question
know,
like that, I have to ask my wife. She's the one
yeah,
that like
people
clarifies things
drop that all the time, and
like
those that like that's something I wonder. I'm gonna ask my sister; she's a doctor. Like I wonder because I use
that.
that same thing. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, it's cool.
So
But like, yeah, well, what I was saying, I mean, I could finish my thought, but what were you going to
yeah,
say,
go
sir?
ahead. No, please do then.
No, my thought was, it's like, okay, you know, we're going into 2021. Um, they're basically almost in the same situation that they were come, you know, last March, right? So what do you do? You know, do you sit back and you spend another year doing that? Or do you like actively reshuffle, you know, what people were doing last year and, you know, give them, you know, say some new programming? Okay, you're going to contact these people, you're going to, you know, create questionnaires, you're going to create dialogue, you're going to, you know, make lemonade, right? Or are you going to kind of like rethink how you're going to keep racquetball viable? Because in all honesty, you know, it's like we've been saying this for years, but it's really dying now because you don't have courts, right?
Yep.
So what I'm saying is not untrue, right? So how do you facilitate that, right?
I think that's definitely something, you know, Freddie, I like that because that's something that those conversations, the things that maybe people don't want to hear, too bad. You know, that's my position now. And that's, I know Ellie too, like too bad. If it's negative or you don't like hearing the fact what Freddie just said, well, go do something and we'll get back to that. But, you know, there's a lot of ideas, right? Like a lot of people like to, especially today on social media, you know, we call them the keyboard warriors or they like to, you know, shit on organizations or associations. I want to say, okay, well, what are you doing? What are you doing about it? You know,
Yeah.
and I think that we can say that, Ellie and I, because this is one of those things we're trying to do.
Right.
But I do, with that said, I think there are a lot other bigger fish, people or organizations or associations that have the ability, and yeah, they need to be held accountable and responsible for the direction, you know, that our sport goes.
Right.
It's important.
And it doesn't have to be adversarial, right? It's like, you know, the slant I've always taken when I write articles is, you know, it's one, seeing something, right, and being able to put it in a way that's, you know, because I write better than I speak, right? Because, you know, I can erase and whatever, right? So like put it in a way where you can get the thought across, right? And I'm a firm believer in that starts dialogue, right? So like I don't consider what I do criticizing. I consider it, you know, opening a door for conversation, right? And there have been many times where I've done this and I've received an email, I've received a phone call. Phone calls I like the best, right? It's like if you don't like something, you know, call me. You know who's really good at that? I'm going to say his name again, Jason Menino, right? So Jason Menino gets me into the sport, right? You're smiling, Sudsy, but you know Jason, right? It's like, so he gets me into the sport. I do this stuff. I'm like, you know, doing photography work. I start Restrung, and I'm like, you know, not complaining, but I'm writing about the pro tours because as a fan, right? So naturally, a lot of the things that I was writing at the time, you know, Jason wasn't too crazy about, right? You know, because it's like I'm pointing at things that should be, you know, hey, maybe we're missing the boat here or whatever. But respect to this guy, he would call me and he would say, hey, look, you know, that thing that you wrote, someone wrote it and someone brought it up in an article when we were like pitching to try to raise money, right? And, you know, he starts a dialogue and he'll tell me, and I'm like, hey, Jason, and then we'll talk about the actual fact. But it never got to a point where it was like, you know, you know, Freddie's doing this to kind of like just to make noise. I'm a fan. You know, I'm a fan. I spend a
Why do you do it? Why do you do it? That's a good question. And by the way, Scotty Mac, if you can pin Freddie's articles, you know, the last few he wrote, pin them up on the in the chat. There's a ton of comments. There's incredible dialogue right now, which tells me that this matters. This conversation matters, you know, inside the chat. So, if we could pin those articles, or Freddie, if you get a chance, that'd be great too. Why do you do it, Freddie? You do write well, and it's interesting perspective.
Well,
And
well, no, well, I mean, again, I initially started Restrung Magazine because it's like, um, before I got into this, like I used to work for colleges, right? I did a lot of diversity work. So for me, racquetball was a really interesting case study, right? Because racquetball itself, when you look at it, um, doesn't really lend itself often to, people who don't have access to courts, right? So initially that was kind of like very intriguing to me. But Restrung Magazine initially was this idea about just a magazine about racquetball, racket sports, right? Non-traditional alternate racket sports, right? Not tennis so much, but squash, racquetball, anything, that's alternate tennis, right? Badminton, I would have included in that. But when I started kind of like actually working for organizations, like taking photos and doing all this stuff, and then it's like that turned into kind of like writing some articles. Like I've written articles for the magazine, USA Magazine before. There were, there were at least 6 or 7 years there where you couldn't open a magazine. And even today, you'll open one of those magazines, you might find a photo from me or whatever, but like saturated with stuff. So I was working at it. And like I mentioned in one of my videos, it's like I learned racquetball watching Kane play on that US Open court.
Right.
So it kind of like initially started, like I had all this content, I had all these photos, I had this video, and like I was watching these players and I was learning about the sport watching them, right? I didn't come into the sport with any preconceived notions. I was sitting on the glass watching them play. What better way to really fall in love with the sport and see what the sport is capable of, right? So I'm a fan. And that's why I do it. I do it because it's like I spend all this time watching, playing, communicating with, dialoguing with. I mean, you stick me and John in a room, and it's like it's two guys who could talk, and we'll talk racquetball for hours and hours and hours. So that's just like what I do. So I mean, when you ask me why I do it, it's almost like a natural extension. It's like I have all this stuff, I'm going through it, and it's like I have all these, all these conversations, right? So when I'm at the US Open, it's like I'm talking to, Evan Pritchard, right? That's a name that people don't say a lot, right? Evan Pritchard's the guy who does the racquetball blog. Now, that's a guy who's been doing this for a very long time, very consistent. I admire the guy because it's like anytime there's an event, it's like if I wanted to know what happened in the event that day, like or that morning that I missed, I'd go to his blog and I'd read it, right? There are guys like that. It's like, so there's a bunch of us. I mean, racquetball is filled with it. So are sports. Sports just happen to have people who love, who are, enthusiasts. And I'm just an enthusiast. I'm a guy who has a blog, who takes photos, who takes videos, who plays the sport. And I love racquetball. Rob and I will talk. It's like we'll play one wall racquetball, and like Thursday we were playing and we were talking about like the LPRT stop. It's I spent 2 years on there, so it's like ever since then he and we talk about the women playing all the time. It's like there's a bunch of fans out there who don't actually play, and that's what they don't understand.
Yeah, sure, there are for sure. And so let's talk about that a little bit. You've spent time up close, right on the glass walls for both tours, seeing the best of the, let's say the late 2008, 2009 on through to current times here.
Yeah.
So, comparing the two tours, do you have thoughts on that, their weaknesses, their strengths, and, what they need to do to prepare to come out of COVID and going forward? We just had an LPRT stop. We have a stop that's going to happen in Atlanta here, hopefully in a couple of weeks, I believe. So,
Right.
here we are. They're trying to get back to a little bit of business at hand. But your thoughts on that?
Well, that's I have a lot of thoughts where that's concerned. I spent 2 years on the LPRT, and if you ask me, I think both tours right now are in the same position, right? It's like the business model, the tours right now relies really heavily on tournament directors, and that's problematic, right? You haven't been able to monetize your streams, right? No matter how much you worked on them, you can only do so much with X amount of money. And the way that people are watching their sports nowadays, like especially when, because I've done a lot of work in other sports too. Like I've done some stuff for squash, I've done a lot of stuff for handball with a good friend of mine. His name is Mike Dembin. A lot of people know him. We spent some time like doing some handball stuff. So it's like I spent some time to like with those groups, and they all pretty much engage the same way, right? It's like anyone right now can stream, right? And the quality, right? If you know, at a certain point, if you can't get to a certain level with your stream, it's not going to fit into your business model because you're not going to be able to monetize it, right? Unless you're going OTT and you're making money the way that, like, you know, Squash does, where they license out their content and they actually are able to facilitate people to watch on different platforms and things like that. Unless you're able to do that, it doesn't work. So you have to create something that's uniquely yours, right? So for instance, you know, video work, the play, as a tour, you have to ask yourself, what's your biggest commodity? The players, right? What are professional players right now? Who's doing the work for professional players right now? Well, either their teams are doing it or the leagues are doing it with, you know, all these, you know, all the money that they pump in to create like this group that's going to actually actively watch and then worry about monetizing afterwards. Or are you going to kind of like really focus in and try to figure out a way to make the player successful, right? Because for every player that you make successful, you become successful, right? So you have if you have if you have resources, right, where are you going to put those resources into, right? You're going to create an event for a player, right? Are you going to uh, wait for somebody to come in and pay for that event, or are you going to raise money and create your own event? And then within that event, try to create something that's going to then build for the player. So, you know, players walk in, show the camera, make it a reality series, do all this stuff, like show advertisers that, hey, there is engagement after this one thing that you're showing, because it's now we have this player, we have that player, we have this player, in aggregate, who are they touching on their social, right? So, I mean, these are the things, these are the concepts that I think the tours have to start engaging more. You don't necessarily have to have a stop with, you know, an open draw, right? You know, you can run a successful tour with 8 players, a do tour, right? Look at what the skateboarders did, right? They got 8 players, they traveled them around the world, and they filmed everything, right? And they created returns, right? I think that's the idea. I mean, it might be easier said than done, but there has to be a new focus. Right now, you know, you can stream the matches, but in all honesty, you know, the average
How
length for people to watch a match is like 4 minutes.
how are Freddie? How, you know, a question was in the chat box. What's your true opinion? Because you do have a unique eye and you know, your ability to see something and how you see it. What do you think, LPRT versus IRT versus USA Racquetball's streaming broadcast?
Uh, right now, LPRT has the best streaming broadcast. I mean, it's like only through consistency, right? The IRT does it very well. I mean, you know, it's like I'm not gonna knock what they do, right? It's like I know how they do it. I know the equipment that they bring in or whatever, but at a certain point, unless you're paying for extra bandwidth, you're competing with the guy with the iPhone, right? So unless you're putting money into facilitating like true broadcast like quality, you know, I'm not a big believer in like, you know, graphics and transitions and all that stuff, because at the end of the day, you know, diehards are going to want to watch the people play, right? Anybody else that is watching is sort of like you know, like that's the cherry on the sundae. but you have to be able to kind of facilitate the cherry on the sundae every single time. So it's like when Paola walks on, it's like just know that, like, as a fan, I'd like to see her walk on. I'd like to see kind of like her conversation beforehand. I'd like to see, uh, what she does to warm up. I mean, I've spent 2 years watching players, do this stuff, and some of the stuff they do out the court, how they, how they talk about each other, how they, communicate with each other, how they train. I mean, these are all very, very usable aspects of what you have in your commodity, which are players. I mean, you have to rethink that, right? Get the kids involved, like young kids. It's like young kid, he'll see Kane walking into the court, and he's not gonna know much unless you show this young kid what Kane can do, and you do it in a
Yeah,
way where you plan it out. Right? It's like you you gotta show him doing what he does in a way where they can take it in digestible little factoid kind of videos, consuming that. That's
you
where
got to
you
speak. You
start.
got to speak. You got to speak to them. You've said it before. You got to visually communicate to
Right.
these individuals, and that's one of the reasons why a partner of mine and a couple of other possible investors are looking at doing a reality-based racquetball show
Right.
where we are going to do exactly that. We're going to highlight all of those things, and then racquetball will follow. And I'm a firm believer, if we create and grow interest in the
Mhm.
sport or interest in the personalities,
Mhm.
then all the other good stuff will come.
Yeah.
And again, when people say, okay, well, how do you do it? I'm doing it. I'm working on it. I'm
Mhm.
working on it right now.
Mhm.
And Freddie, you know a little bit about that,
Yeah.
what I'm working on.
Yeah.
And you can do it. And sure, it takes money. Ellie, I know we've been hearing that for how long? That's just right.
Yeah, I mean, and this
The
is all,
money thing.
yeah, sure. And I agree with what's being said here. I agree with both your guys' feelings on that. The crazy thing for me, Freddie, and this is kind of a crazy statement, is it sounds like the matches don't matter that much. When I know that's not the
That's
case,
not the case.
I understand that's not the case, but you're speaking about it in terms of how we're able to consume visual now and take it in from not just our age perspective, but what others are going to be attracted to, younger kids,
Right.
my teenage kids,
Right.
the 20 somethings, go through all the categories. But it's different now. It sounds more like, if let's say Tennis Channel is covering a US Open event, it sounds more like, shows about the actual match that happened, not just showing the match, having other elements to the match, the walk-in, the backstories, the other really cool moments that you can get from different angles, from seeing it from the bottom upwards. Just, I'm talking about an angle of a camera can be really
Yeah.
important to
Yeah.
a moment for somebody who's trying to be attracted to racquetball.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
that's hard to consume for a lot of people who probably watch our show, and some of the old timers that watch our show, but not as much for some of the younger generation that might watch the show. Is the match is not really the full match, and every rally not being
Right.
as important to have that right there
Right.
for the viewer.
Well, different times. I mean, look at UFC. I've become a UFC fan because of the way that they get me engaged, and like if I watch a match, it's like I kind of, because I want to see that guy get knocked out, right? It's kind of like one of those things. Um, but when you're talking about like the matches not mattering, they matter. Make them matter to me, right? It's like it's like, if I know there are uh, a gaggle of really good young Mexican players, right? I know this, right? I know they're all coming out, but if I don't know their backstory, then it's just two guys running through the court, me
Mm-hmm.
not knowing. It's like, if I know the game a little bit, yeah, that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. But you're not going to get me to sit there and wait for something to happen if I don't know who they are, right? And I just think that the tours, they're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place, right? Because they're sitting on these models with the way that the models have been run over the years, right? So the LPRT and the IRT have, they both have boards, they both have people, they things are done on consensus, to a certain point. But at a certain point, different than say USA Racquetball, there's always somebody who makes a decision, and you have to make a decision whether it's popular or unpopular. And
Who does
that's
that? Who?
somebody at the tours, right? So it's
Oh, on the
kind of
tour.
like,
Yeah, on the tours.
right.
Mhm.
So, at a certain point, if you don't have someone doing those things and willing to kind of like take a risk on doing something differently, you're just gonna have the
It,
same old thing.
you know what? It's perfect time, Ellie. Real quick, I just want to, obviously when I was working with USA Racquetball, um, one of the things that I thought was an issue was there was a lot of red tape. There was, like you said, decisions seemed to not be able to be made maybe the way they needed to. And Freddie, to your point, and I posed this to a few people. I said, what's the most successful or best thing racquetball's had in the last 20 to 25 years? It's pretty easy. It's not a trick question. Ellie, you can jump in if you.
Now let's hear it.
US Open. The US Open is the biggest and best asset for racquetball as a sport.
Mhm.
And the way that event is run, it's owned by USA Racquetball. This is all public knowledge. But Doug Ganem runs it. And guess what? He runs it however the hell he wants. And he's not afraid to make those decisions. He's not afraid to be accountable and responsible and own them. And he looks at it and says, if I think this is what's best for the event, that's what I'm going to do. So there's a lot to be said with what you just said, Freddie. Go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, for me, Freddie, I'm kind of curious. Obviously Paola Longoria is, doing as much as she can for her brand and for the sport at this stage of her career, and is really noticeable. Obviously, in Mexico, huge.
Mhm.
Probably some other Latin American countries, and pretty good here in the United States in terms of just with the racquetball community. But outside of that, maybe not so much. But
Mhm.
what are the ladies doing a better job with this kind of new way of presenting themselves and their tours that they're playing, matches for? Or what are the guys missing on that side of it, in your opinion, as well? Because obviously Kane's somebody who's, he's an interesting conversation. I really enjoy talking racquetball with him, but you get outside of that and it's like, man, you're 39, 40 years old now, whatever he is, 39, 38, 39. And there's been a lot of years of winning that he hasn't became a bigger name in the worldwide spectrum of sports. I mean, he's the most dominant athlete in the world for a little
Right.
while, for a long while now. I mean,
Right.
any sport, he's the
Right.
most dominant athlete in the world. And
Right.
Paolo is a close second, really.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, then again, the whole Paola Kane thing, it's like, on one hand, I can't blame Kane at all. And on another hand, I mean, it's like, I like the guy, he's always been very cool with me. But then the decision is his right now because,
Mhm.
to be totally honest, no one's helping him here, right? No one's helping him here. They're not like actively, you know, his clock is ticking. He's their biggest, and when I say they, I mean the IRT. He's their biggest draw. I mean, there should have been, or they could have been, right? They could have helped themselves by like actively pursuing, maybe creating something, or just giving the guy some some like light through, again, I'll say it again, your priorities on where you spend your money is a really big kind of indicator of, what your priorities are. I mean, just kind of like using him to kind of continue in a relationship with their sponsors, saying, hey, look, we can't do much for you this year, but this is what we'll do, right? We'll go out and we'll spend some time with Kane, right? We'll do some live things, we'll take some video, do that with your players. Same thing with the LPRT, something like that could have been done, it's like instead of just, 2020 saw a lot of kind of trends, right? So everybody was repurposing, old sporting content because nobody was doing sports, right? So that racquetball was late in the game for that, but we're regurgitating old matches, nothing wrong with that. But, that'll only get you so far and only so much interest, right? Um, with the LPRT, and the ladies, I mean, they naturally have a better fit for something like this because their players are active on social, right? They got their own things going on. And in aggregate, a tour can pretty much argue, hey, look, if we can figure out a way on how we can highlight these players as players or people, interesting kind of like personalities that they are prior to their matches then become that much bigger. But in lieu of matches, you can do this stuff, right? Or you can kind of like spend some time and maybe finding a place where you could showcase maybe, for the players coming out and playing, somewhere or something. Creatively, it's up to them, right? But the idea is that you have this product, and instead of kind of like waiting for something to open up, go out and do something with your product. I mean, it's not going to kill you to try to do something like that.
In your opinion right now, and my buddy Mike, I know he doesn't love this question because I have this discussion with him all the time, but real simple, in your opinion, and both of you, I want to know. So I'll start with you first, Freddie. Who do you think has the best product right now in racquetball?
Wow, that's are we talking organizations?
Organizations, yeah, not rackets and balls.
LPRT. I say
L-
LPRT. I say LPRT because I spent 2 years working on the LPRT. I mean, I love everybody there. The players, and I know for a fact that they the thing that they do, they're very committed in doing that. And they've done it better over the years.
Ellie, what do you think? First off, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do right now. I do, and pretty much the same reasons. I think it's you kind of know the result in singles with Paola winning and everything in terms of the results of the events. We've only had one in the past 10 months, so
Yeah.
we're talking about past stuff here. But they're engaging. I think the ladies are a little more engaging online, and as a follower of some of it, yeah, I see it more.
All right. Well,
can I add something to that really quick? Sorry, Sergi.
Yeah, you can.
One thing I want to add that to that too is that they've always they've also had a bit more consistency in like what the draws would look like. And when you have that, you have the ability to actually watch these younger players develop, right? And with the LPRT, for some reason, obviously if you put a man and a woman on a court, you have two different games, but the level of play over the last few years for the LPRT has been progressively getting better. And that's one of the things I used to talk about all the time. And if you watch enough, you can see it. And that's, so if you're talking about product, that's it. I mean, other than that, IOTS Kane, they have really good young players, but the thing is that I don't see them enough to know.
Yeah, Belinda Detman, who we all know, great photographer, fellow photographer, just posted. She said, "Social media tells a story. You have to know a player to create a fan. There needs to be a lot. No social media equals no fans." So where I sit, one of the things, and how I see this though also is as a player, I have a responsibility to market myself as well. If my sponsor isn't doing it, or if my tour isn't doing it, and that's what I want to do as my career for a living, as a professional, which is what I like to think I am.
Yeah.
And I just think that the LPRT as individuals, they do it on their own better, because again, to be fair, nobody at the LPRT is telling them to do what we see all the time
Right.
on social media.
Right.
So I think, yes, that makes their product better. There's no doubt about it. And Shane DeWitt says he agrees. They just need to market it better and broadcast it professionally. Just a better broadcast. So,
right. Well,
hey, buddy.
the thing about the broadcast, again, let's not get caught up in the broadcast, because at a certain point, you're spending money for something that has to create a return. So if you spend all this money on a better broadcast, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you the return, right? Unless you know that you're creating the product for someone in specific. Like say, so if you have a big sponsor, you're creating a quality product, you know ahead of time that you're creating that product for that sponsor. You say that the women are doing it better, but the women are doing it better individually, right?
Right.
So
That's
like for
what I
you,
mean.
so when you think about it, like in all like actuality right now, you are in the same position as say the players on the LPRT are and the players on the IRT, even though you're not playing, because you're very active, you're still doing videos on racquetball, and it's still content, and it's something that's digestible, right? We don't have enough of that where the players are concerned. There's nobody organizing this, and the women that are doing it right are off on their own, doing their own thing. Like look at Paola. Much respect to Paola. That's, you know, that's my girl right there. It's funny about Paola is because, you know, she's wicked smart. When I first got on the tour, you know, it's like I didn't really have a lot of conversations with her because you know, I know she's very kind of like, you know, she's smart to the point that she knows who's for real and who doesn't. So, you know, I spent a lot of time kind of like building my credibility with her. And in doing that, I've learned a lot from her, right? Very smart, very savvy, always thinking about the next step, right? The players need to be doing that the same way the organizations need to be doing that, right? So what I say to the professional players now, it's like, I put it on you too. I mean, you guys could be doing this. Imagine if like Jake, look at Jake. All right, I'll use him as an example.
Good example.
Right? Jake Brendenbeck, when he first came onto the tour, right? And this is a discussion I wanted to have with you, John, about like the differences between the players in the 2000s and the players in the 2010s, right? Now, you guys had the cane issue too, but you didn't have the cane issue till later on in the decade. These guys came in with the cane issue, right? So everybody's playing for second place, but you still had this like, and racquetball, we could talk about this, you know, for hours on its own, like the sense of the how do I say the sense of entitlement that, you know, the the game has brought on because of player programs and sponsorships and things like that, right? So
Yep.
I saw a lot of these players coming on, like I came from college campuses. So these guys were the age group that I was working on, like working with. So these guys are coming on to the tour and they know they're playing for second place, but they're acting like they already belong there, right? Not like, you know, not like you guys where you guys were gleaning. Like I know when you guys were younger, you would see Cliff and you're like, okay, I'm going to ask Cliff this, or I'm going to do this. These guys will come in and it's like, you know, not that all of them were doing it, but they were coming in already kind of like, well, we're the top players, you know, but we're not going to win because Kane's going to win, but I'm still going to be like, you know, whatever, not doing like the work that they need to be doing. So
I don't mind being number two. Is not something we ever thought, any of us.
right. So, you know, it's like, and remind me to come back to this conversation because I have a very funny story about the US Open where I was listening to you, Sudsy, talk to Cliff right before a final, right? See, this is one of the perks of being like, you know, in those spots, right?
Well,
So
run
we'll
with
go
the
back
story.
to that. Let me go back. Let me go
Tell the
back.
story.
No, let me go back, right? So I brought Jacob, right? So it's like he's this guy, tremendous talent, good-looking kid, especially now. Did you see him out there? He's out there without a shirt, you know, playing, hits the ball a ton, can be very, you know, very funny, very cool guy. This is a guy that could be doing a lot more. And if he's waiting for events to do this, then he's missing the boat because he's young enough to be able to be creating these types of videos. Make mistakes, guys. Go out. Let people know what you're doing. Create challenge matches. Say, hey, look, at 10 o'clock on Sunday night, I'm going to be playing this guy. We're going to be doing it. Go out and do it.
Yeah.
Make mistakes. Make them ugly. The videos are ugly. But the thing is that you guys aren't active enough. And if you're waiting for the tours to do it, it's not going to happen.
I would like to see Jake chop down a tree, a big tree. That I would tune in for that.
That kid could do anything, right? He could do anything and then show up with a racket and it's like, oh, he plays racquetball too, right?
Exactly.
But he's not
That's
the only
exactly
one.
right.
that's the thing, you know, it's like, I don't only put the onus on the tours, the players, and I've written about this
I'm with you on that.
100 times, right?
I'm
So
with
it's
you.
like, especially now, all they got to do is watch handball in New York City for like a day. These guys go out and they record everything. C players get shine. You got to see these guys. They go out and record these things. You get these C players from some court in the Bronx somewhere that nobody heard about, and they're getting like 5,000, 6,000 views. It's because they're consistent and they're doing their thing and they know who their market is. When you start doing that, then maybe you might get something for free from a sponsor. That opens the door to making money. How do you think some of these girls are doing it over in Mexico and stuff like that? They're consistent.
Well,
They're
a lot of
doing
them aren't paying for anything.
They're not paying for anything. It's like there are these platforms that you can go on as athletes that you can sign on to, that you can just say, hey, I have X amount, you know, somebody send me something, I'll do a video for you or whatever before you know it. But the thing is that they're not doing this.
Freddie, is there more interest for you when you see a handball match that has a known $100 bill on it and the players are putting up their own money? Like, because that's a big thing around NorCal here in SoCal, that the handballers is like, they have their videos going here too. I see them all the time here just from my locals, and they're always gambling. They're always betting. It's like highlight out there.
Well, the thing is, it's like, you know, in order to make anything matter, you need to have something on the line.
Should we have more betting going on here in Racquetball?
Well, you know, apples and oranges, right? Because handball, you have a completely different demographic, right? You know, it's like you know, you got the bottles of beer, you got like, you know, the raw, like
the culture's different.
Urban culture. Yeah, it's totally different, right? So I don't necessarily say that, you know, gambling is the ticket, but setting up your own matches is.
Yep.
You know, as a player, you know, you a player, you know, like imagine Jake saying, I'm doing my own tour. I'm going to go challenge every player outdoor and I'm going to play them. I'm going to film it, win or lose. Yeah. Right. You do that 5 times, Jake, you got people following you. Yeah. Right. I'm going to travel to California and I'm going to challenge Rocky to a game. Right? You know, make it worth his while, whatever, or have somebody, you know.
You're making me want to fly back to Brooklyn right now to play a little outdoor with you.
Well, dude, we talked about this. I had a proposal for you, and you said
guess what?
So
I might be in town in a week. I'll take you up, but it's gonna be a little too cold.
Well, that's you know. We could
Zariga.
always
we'll talk about that.
Indoor.
You know what? Maybe we'll do that, and this will be the announcement for everybody on the show. Good chance you see Freddie and I next week sometime indoor, or the next 2 weeks somewhere in New York City. We'll leave it at that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. You know, we want to make it interesting. You know, it's like maybe pull out like another indoor player for you to come and play with us.
I could find somebody.
So I mean, you know, see, but that's the thing. You know, it's like it's all up to your imagination, right? As players. Right. But then again, if you're waiting for the organizations to do something for you, you know, that's problematic. You're aging out. You know, there's a lot of players. Look at Rocky, look at Kane. It's like this whole season done. That's a lifetime in what's left in their career. Right. So if they're going to wait 2001, you know, somebody's got to make some matches for these guys, and it's viable. I mean, it's like, it's probably cheaper. It's probably easier for you to, you know, to get somebody to sponsor a match between those two guys and put something on it, or maybe something very interesting. You and I have talked about stuff like this, but that's another
I think
thing.
There's major interest in not just current players, but past players being able to do this if they have the personality to be on camera in between games, whatever the situation, you know, to build that camera moment that they're having. You know, Suds, it'd be really interesting to watch you go to 10 different cities within, you know, 3 months and play 10 different groups of people, you know, a match. It doesn't have to be one of the best top 3 players.
I need a sponsor.
KWM does so much already. And don't tell me you need indoor courts, right? Outdoor courts
I'll play anything. Give me a racket.
The great equalizer, right? So Sudsy, you're in shape. You're in shape. Imagine you playing Kane outside. Right? You're both like, you know, different games. You're both adjusting, right? You're both kind of have to do this thing. And it's not like you're playing, you know, it's not like you guys are going to play like, you know, if it happens or if something happens or if anything happens, right? It's not like you guys have to play like, you know, full blown,
it's a good message. It's a good message, Freddie. You're saying you don't have to wait for the tours. You don't have to wait for the tournament.
Wait.
Like I want to see Rocky versus Kane in Huntington Beach on Marina Court.
Don't wait. All these young kids, all these young kids need to be kind of out there, kind of challenging each other, playing each other. That's what they need to be doing, right? And then the organizations then kind of like start gleaning off of this stuff.
It sounds, I love it. It sounds great, but and I've always been one of those guys that's front and center trying to teach a lot of these young guys and kids exactly, Ellie, how to make money, how to maximize their exposure, their potential, everything you're saying. Here's what they're going to say. Freddie, that's a great idea. How the hell is Jose Diaz or Bobby Horn? That's a bad example because they're close by, so they could do this shit all the time. But, hey, Sudsy's in Ecuador. And this is great. I'm going to go play Kane in outdoor in Texas. Then I'm going to go in California and play Rocky in indoor and singles. Then I'm going to go to New York and play all the guys over there. And we're going to be throwing, $20, $50, $100 a game on it. We're going to build all this content. Who's fronting the bill?
Well, it depends. Like, what are you creating return? It's like, people are still going to buy rackets, right? But they also buy other things. Right. The idea is,
manufacturers aren't paying for this anymore. That's out. So that's gone.
It comes with actually doing it. Right. Those are the problems that solve themselves with engagement. That's one thing. That's the new currency in social media. It's kind of like how you can activate your engagement. Right. So for someone like, like a racquetball player or something like that, it's easy. It's not that it's easy, but it's kind of like, first, do something that draws interest, right? Quantify who your viewers are, right? And then try to create a return with who those people are, right? Like try to get a link going with, a manufacturer or something. I don't know. But see, the thing is that the market's already developed for individual athletes. There are platforms that you can just go on right now today. Sudsy, there are platforms that you can sign up for, and then you can kind of like put yourself out there on like these like boards where these prospective sponsors actually go through, and they'll say, I see someone in fencing, or I see somebody in tennis, or and they have X amount of followers, right? And then what you do is then you say what you're willing to kind of like endorse, right? You'll endorse anything, you can choose not to do alcohol. You can choose to do pets. You can mark these things down, and then you do it, right? And then eventually on these platforms, and there's multiple platforms, not only one, you can put yourself on these platforms, and then you can say, hey, look, you create these resumes, but you keep doing it. And then eventually somebody, if you're lucky and you're doing it right, you might get a ping. Somebody might want to send you something, right?
Freddie, guess what we're talking about tomorrow? You and I. You're going to be showing me how to put this
that's another thing the tours could do. I mean, I actually tried this with the LPRT, but we were when I tried this with the LPRT, we just weren't ready to do it, right? Like, so initially I had tried to platform all the players onto this platform that would allow me to kind of like access their social, right? And then the pro teams use these now, right? So like if I have something like, say, for Carla, right, as somebody who's running the tour, say I have video or like picture for her, right? And I want to create content, right? I could then send her something through a text. She can accept it and it goes out on all her social, right? And as somebody is an agent for that, I get the engagement numbers, right? So as a tour, to be able to do that, you can aggregate it, right? You have Paola, you have Jessica, you have all these players, right? But that requires that's a different look at your business model, right?
That's absolutely right there. I mean, that's back to USA Racquetball. Are they staffed anywhere near being able to do that?
They can't do anything like this, right? USA Racquetball should be doing two things. Either they should be facilitating with their constituents right now, and then looking at 2021 as, hey, maybe this might be another 2020 for us, because in all likelihood, the numbers aren't getting any better, right? So it's like for them,
I mean, they just canceled the high school nationals, which was in
right.
March,
So
February.
what
So
can they do tomorrow? You ask me what they can do tomorrow, same thing they can do in March, right?
what
Like,
should they
hey,
have done yesterday?
well,
Is
no,
my,
forget that, right? They need to decide on one of two things. Are they going to stick it out and wait and stay with their mandate, which is basically creating competitive teams for international play, right? Because that's what they're doing, and they create events so people can play.
Right.
But if there's nowhere where these guys can play events, then they need to be rethinking this. Either they're going to wait it out, right, and then change their game plan for 21, which is like aggregate, like take the temperature, right? Take the temperature of your constituency, right? Find out who's doing what, who's accessing what, and go from there. How can you support the people who are getting back to you? How can they then support you because you're helping them? People will do this stuff for free if you show them a little attention. It's not rocket science. Throw their videos up where they're playing with their people. Hey, this person's playing over there. This person playing over there. If you're not going to do that, then change the game. And these aren't new ideas, right? The idea for a national racquetball center has been offered up in the past. And I'm not going to say who's offered it up, but they've had, and from what I've known, and you guys know this stuff too. It's like these aren't new ideas. They've been presented. Infrastructure just isn't there to be able to facilitate this because the board, because self-interest, because of all this stuff. You need to be able to kind of like say, hey, look, we need to rethink this. We're a nonprofit. Let's go raise some money. Let's go like the same way. Like, how do you raise money for a nonprofit for kids in the hood? Well, you tell them where you're going to be with those kids in 5 years. You need to do the same thing with racquetball, right? So it's like, hey, look, you're not going to the clubs. You're not going to the clubs. I'm sorry, I'm like talking a lot, but you're not going to the clubs, and you're not convincing a guy to keep his courts there, right? When he can make more money, with Jane Fonda videos, right? I'm being funny here, but at the same time, you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
Go out and build something that then someone can look at and say, I want that here. It's like I mentioned chicken and pickles. It's the same thing, especially now it's different.
Well, I touched on it in my monologue, Ellie, and then you're up. But Freddie, I love it. I love the national. Everything's been brought to me, whether it's been privately or publicly. What can be done, what should be done. The National Event Center is great. One thing I always come back to is it's so important to have the right leadership and people making the decisions that what they're going to do with whatever is fed or whatever they now have in their hands.
Right.
Ellie,
Right.
and
Yeah, the way you're talking, I'm happy from my perspective here in Stockton that that I have a father who pushes hard to develop youth racquetball. That Jody Nance is in. She's been here for a long time. So that we've had this group of guys who've now kind of aged out of playing professional racquetball, and that's probably an interesting topic for you because none of them are doing enough socially to keep their brand there, even if they're not winning the tournaments or making the semis and making prize money that's enough to keep them around. But it's interesting, the development of the sport from the ground floor, from being in the court or on the outdoor court with players that are young to the sport that are going to develop and hopefully attract their friends and family to want to play the sport and have it move on and on. So I like what you're saying, and then there's that part of it as well, and it's a difficult thing, and it's a difficult to pin on any one organization. Yeah. And so, it seems like we need more people working in the sport, but they can't get paid up front. You got to go to work for the good of the sport.
Can I say something about your dad and what he's doing? That's another place where they missed the boat. I mean, RYDF is very, very lucky to be working with them
and we're lucky to be with them too. Because
you know what, Mike Lippett, that guy, I love that guy, right? Because he's all about building the sport, right? And with what you guys are doing, like Jody, your dad, that's another place. And I've written about this years ago. That's another place where an organization like USA Racquetball missed the boat, right? Because think about it. That's a one spot right? That's the one spot where they actually had the they actually had the ingredients to start something very, very special. I'll tell you why. Look at Jose Rojas, right? Where did he graduate from?
UOP, University Pacific, Franklin High School.
Right. His brother graduated from there
Same,
too.
yeah.
Right. So
CIP program,
okay.
interesting
So,
program.
it's not like USA doesn't have like relationships with colleges. They have college collegiates, right? It's like, okay, so what's to prevent them from stepping in and saying, hey, look, we're going to start trying to access people like from these communities and get them on the court, and then we're going to try to next step them. Maybe we can create a one-off for one player, right? Say, hey, look, we have this we have this one kid who has a ton of potential. He's doing great in school, right? Or you could even marry it, right? Do what squash does, half the time on the court and then half the time in studies, right? But you don't do that the first time. What you do is you look for one player. And then as an organization, they have the credibility to go to college and say, hey, look, would you be willing to, work with us in terms of like maybe helping us design a one-off uh, scholarship for this one kid, right? And base it on how well he does in school, grades wise, right? It's been done before. The thing is that, you don't have people thinking like this. You have to have this spirit to explore these things. But then again, you got to want that demographic. You got to be willing to say, hey, look, I want that group. How do we get these young guys, especially from those neighborhoods, right? But if you don't want that, then you're not going to see it, right? And that's
Right.
problematic too, because it's like, I'll tell you the truth. I really don't feel their heart is anywhere near anything like that, in terms of like creating access and using racquetball as kind of like a springboard to future success. Not that they haven't talked about it or whatever, or that people don't have a heart for it. I've had conversations with Jason Thorner before he left about similar things like that, and it's like, and he suffered from the same thing everyone else does, in terms of like gridlock, you know. But what they do, that's a gold mine over there in Stockton. That's a gold mine, So it's not like it can't be done. It's
right.
it's
It's interesting, Sudsy, because we've been talking about when we're going to have my dad on the show, it's going to be about how to form as a community, and really, for without getting paid, just for volunteer work, like you see a lot of other youth sports happen in America, where you got, the organizations there, but there's a lot of volunteer parents and people coaching and doing it for not making any money on it. They're just doing it for the betterment of the kids,
great people,
doing things and learning and life experiences and playing
great
sport
people.
with that. So that's it's easy to say, and that's the show that we're going to have them on, but here we are, COVID 10 months later. And we've been saying, we got to kind of wait until the courts are open up, or else we can't do it. Now it's cold everywhere, so the outdoor is not as easy to play. So it's it's kind of unfortunate, but it kind of falls right in that line. Like, if you don't get started on doing it, then it's just going to be an idea talked about that doesn't get done. And it's not easy to go to other communities and say, hey, adults that play just for themselves and for your friends, like, stop being about that for a little while, maybe 2 hours on one night a week, and host a juniors class. Will the facility let it happen? Is there, are there outdoor courts that the city will let it happen? Are there insurance issues that need to be taken care of first? Of course, so go back to RYDF. We're very lucky to have them as our stability, when it comes to a little bit of funding that's necessary, whether it's product based or instruction based or things that are there, but really be able to build the platform to have this. And we'll put this information out. We've done it in Northern California, but it's a good ground floor example. And I think it kind of fits into the mold of what you're talking about, whether it's the current pro players, past pro players, people involved in the sport that want to see it do better and build that. You got to take it into your own hands and start to do stuff instead of
Right.
just sit by and talk about it or watch it
Right.
go by, whether you're someone who wants to be on a board or not.
Yeah.
Like, I'm curious, have you tried to be on the USA Racquetball board, Freddie?
Mhm. I did one year. I wrote about it, of course, like I write about everything that happens to me. I One year I sent a letter of intent, and I tried to get on the board. It's like I knew what the qualifications were, but I had already been doing what I've been doing for a number of years, and I already had kind of like some connections to people. So I put in a letter of intent, and I got a letter back saying, well, since you're not a member, you're not doing this, but I deliberately put my name in as a non-member because I really feel like in order to have a board that can work objectively, that you have to access people from outside of the sport, right? They have to be able to look at you and say, hey, no, what you see is not what I see outside, right? And I mean, as a nonprofit, it boggles my mind to have a board that, that is kind of like just so incestuous within kind of like what they're about. I mean, you can't realistically grow that way as a nonprofit, right? So I did. I put in my name, and I got a letter saying, thanks, but no thanks. And then a couple of years, went
Don't
by.
feel bad. I got a phone call that said thanks, but no thanks 3 years ago when I
But
put my name in.
then again, I don't run indoor tournaments. I don't volunteer. I don't do all those things. And, maybe I am somebody that they don't want on the board because I think I'd cause a lot of gridlock because I probably disagree half the time. Although I'm like that guy who would disagree in the boardroom, but then agree outside. I'm not, I'm not, I don't shoot torpedoes.
You're in.
But that's the thing. I like, as fans, right? Like, we can't be USA bashing, right?
We're not.
We're not, right? But we can only say what we say and then let it be, right? Because it's at a certain point.
You don't let it be. At a certain point, you hope somebody does something.
No, you go out and you do your thing.
Yeah,
you go out and do your thing. People are still going to play. People are still going to play. Everybody suffered during 2020, but from what I know, the retailers didn't suffer as badly as, say, like, the guys who run courts, right? People are still buying rackets. People will still play, even without us. Even without us, people will still play until like that last guy ages out, and that's not going to happen. But the thing is how do you grow the sport, and for me, USA Racquetball has one of two things. Either they have their constituency, which they're constantly looking to build in new creative ways, or they have to remodel. And they're not the tours, right? So they have to operate independently. Their thing is, I really see something like a really teched out national kind of like center. It doesn't have to be huge, but courts with like the tech that allows you for cameras, heart rates, all those things, games on the board, on the walls, so you can monetize throughout the week. You can do everything from like little games with kids.
Then you got to get people to go there,
and it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive. But the thing is that they're a nonprofit. Go out and raise money for it, but you have to have an end game. If you're not going to do that, work with your constituencies. If you're not going to work with your constituencies, then just wait, and don't keep telling us that you're waiting. Just wait, and let everybody do whatever they're going to. Just wait, What else are you going to do? It's
we might need a part 2 with Freddie here. Ellie, I know you got one last question, and I have something for Freddie, and then we're going to get moving along here.
Yeah, I mean, my last question, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but it's so less important than some of the stuff we've been talking about for the last 15, 20 minutes here, and even the whole show for that matter.
I like
but
this point.
Like, do we need to have more mixed doubles happening at the pro level? Like this, it never happens. Doubles has become more popular. The women, we're saying like the women are a little bit more interesting than the men right now for us, whether it's a social engagement that we're taking part in, that we know people are taking part in compared to the male pros.
Yeah.
Or just that, I don't know. No. We like listening to the streaming better for whatever people's reasons are. But it just never happens. We don't have enough mixed doubles ever in the history of this sport. And I'm
No.
kind of interested how that would be. And do you think that's important at all?
I think it's very important. I mean, Jim Heiser threw a tournament a couple of years ago in Denver.
Denver.
I was there, and it was a hit, right? I think mixed doubles is a very important part of the game. It's very important where we play here in New York. Mixed doubles is huge. We just had a huge mixed doubles paddleball tournament here yesterday, as a matter of fact. We
huge in the world of pickleball as well. Huge in pickleball.
But that's what I'm saying. But then again, it comes with the same thing. It's kind of like, okay, tell the story a little bit, right? You know, when I saw Paola playing with Montoya, I thought that was interesting, right? You know, it's like, who are these players playing? Are they playing with their, with people from their country? Are they playing, but then again, I'm a big believer, like, I'm not a big mixed doubles fan. Only I'm a big mixed, I misspoke. I'm not a big doubles fan. I'm a big doubles fan for teams, right? So who are the teams? You only got like a handful like out there, right? You got Kane and Ben, right?
Yep.
The most interesting team out there right now, right? And you got Daniel and Alvaro, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
Jake and Diaz have their moments every now and
Jake
then.
and Diaz?
Rocky
Okay.
and
Now
Rocky
the women,
and somebody, maybe Sudsy and Alex a little bit.
The women have regular partners, right?
Yeah.
Not all of them, but they do.
It's
that for me is more interesting. That for me is like teams, because teamwork is, then you're talking about nuance, then you're talking about interest. But then again, it's like, am I interested in them? Do I know their backstories? When I was on the LPRT, I knew everyone's backstory. So I could watch every single match. I could see the progression. I could talk about it. I could, but those are the things that you need to be communicating. Like, what are they doing? Like when guys are talking on, on the tour thing, I don't want to hear about, like, we talk about this all the time. I don't want to hear like, oh, that was nice, that was this, that was that. Tell me something that they were doing off the court right before they played, or the history between these two players, or just like what this one person does as opposed to what this other person does. Break it down like that. Start there. That's something that costs you no money to do, right? Start doing that first, and then let that guide you into kind of what you need to be showing, right? What it's like when that's the thinking. The thinking is kind of like, you got to look at your product, and you got to like individually do that.
Go back to the Cliff Sudsy story that we never let you get to.
Yeah. Before we run out of time. All right. So I'm sitting before final. I'm trying to remember what year, because they played in so many finals. So one year, Kane is playing, obviously, Rocky in the final. And Sudsy and Cliff are sitting at a table in the back, right? And Jason was sitting there, but he left right before they left. So they're doing the intro. So they do the intros, and they're doing the lights in the back and stuff like that. So the two players are in the back waiting for their names to be called, right? And it's like, it's interesting watching the conversations, right? That's always very interesting, like, to me, hearing the conversation.
What conversation?
The conversations between the two players ready to go on, right? Are they being civil? Are they doing this? Right? Like, look, but that's the face. That's the face right there. Let me expound on that. So you and Cliff are in the back, and you're watching the whole Kane and Rocky thing in the back. And then as soon as they go, and I'm not going to repeat what you guys said, but let me just say that there is a huge difference with the way that you guys view competition on the court, off the court, as opposed to the players in the 2010s, right? So you have like these group of players, whether it's out of kind of just their environment, because you got these guys in Mexico who all play in these little hotspots, so they all know each other. So when they travel, they all know each other. They're friendly. They're goofing around, and you guys did that too. You went and you off and you had your fun. But when you guys were at the court, all bets were off, right? Yeah. And I saw the contempt on your faces that day, and that's me saying it nicely, because Cliff everybody knows Cliff will hit you in a heartbeat. Cliff will call you out in a heartbeat. And this is a guy who does nothing but laugh with me, but I know how he could be. And then listening to him, it just, for me, was kind of like an aha moment, right? Just seeing these two old guys talk about how the new guys were going out. And for me, just like it, but it does translate. Like, I'm not just saying this out of like, you know, oh, let's talk about nostalgia. It does translate. How hungry are you as a player? How
So
hungry are you as a racquetball player?
so you caught Kane good shotting Rocky before the match, giving him the love before
No,
he's gonna
I
go put it on him,
no.
and then you saw
Well,
Sudsy and Cliff's disgust for that.
no, it wasn't Kane. It was Rocky, because Rocky's a nice guy. Rocky
No,
was
right,
kind of like, and
right.
Kane is just like this or whatever. And Kane is like kind of like they're holding a civil conversation. It's kind of like small talk in an elevator.
Kane's
Right?
phenomenal at that, though. I mean, he because he's the one with the ultimate confidence going into that match, whether it's the record, his abilities, the history that he has. So he's bringing Rocky into that world right before, which was not even entertained in the, forget about just the 90s and early 2000s with these guys and myself, but Hogan and them. I mean, those guys rolled around together too, but they were going to fight each other
Yeah,
half the time on the
yeah,
court and stuff.
yeah.
So it goes back to the history of the sport too.
Well, Kane has that conversation on everybody, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
not a conversation. There's not a racquetball player in the world that he can afford to be magnanimous with, right?
Yeah,
So it's like, hey,
good
he
point.
gives you that smile. He's very cool. He's really good at it. He's
Yeah,
really good at it. I tell you, that guy's
one of the
really
best
good
ever.
one of the best ever, right? And then Rocky's like this, like, yeah, happy-go-lucky, and he's been there before. They've played each other a million times. Like, the record shows for itself, speaks for itself. And he wasn't at that place where he was getting any traction. If anything, he was losing ground on what he was able to do against Kane. And I saw the contempt on your face for that, because I felt like you guys expected he needed to do something more. And on some levels, I agreed with you. On some levels, I agreed. Rocky needed to be nastier. I wrote an article one time years ago, like asking Rocky where his outdoor game was, because there was a time on the outdoor court where Rocky it was just at that transition where they started playing all at Marina, but before that, Golden West, Rocky was trying to get by Brian Hawks, so he was hungry.
Yeah,
he
he
was
was.
nasty.
He
And
was
he was
filthy
hitting
out
some
there.
shot.
Yeah.
He was filthy, mean, nasty.
Yeah.
But then when he transitioned, he's like ceiling balling everything. I'm like, go for some flat shots. You hit it like a. It's like I couldn't understand what was going on. But hearing the conversation between Sudsy and Cliff in the back, kind of for me cemented like all these little pieces that I had been kind of like gleaning on what was going on with the players. And I have 1,000 of those stories at USA Open at the US Open. You know what I mean?
It drives me nuts about my young and Stockton guys who played professionally, and there's 4 or 5, 6 of them, and it even rolls into the topic of hitting somebody with the ball or holding up and hoping for a penalty hinder or just whatever to all that.
Well, some guys can get away with that, right? Some guys can get away with being unique on the court, right? In terms of like friendly or whatever, but you have to have a shtick. You have to have something that you can put down on the court in order to be able that way. If you don't have that and you're hungry, you don't need to be nice to anybody. You could be respectful and you could be gleaning, right? But unless you're in there as a professional thinking that, right? It's like for me, I don't like mixed doubles, right? I don't like mixed doubles because there's just some things that I don't do well. Like I don't attack women well on the court. And some of the women, Anita, like she's funny because it's like
Shout out Anita
Maldonado. I love you
active
to death, right? But she's the first one to say, like, I wanted to smack him for saying that, right? And it's like,
Sure.
I've known her since she's the only one allowed call me Little Freddie, and no one gets away with that. Anita gets away with that. But that's what I'm talking about. Unless you can transition on a heartbeat with your boys or whatever, but you're not joking with them outside the court unless you have something. If you don't have anything, you don't walk into a tour like you made it because you're playing for second place. That's the thing. It's like there are a lot of lot of nuances there that the new players can do that. You don't see that so much on the LPRT because they're really hungry. Like Gabby, you see Gabby, she's for real on the court. You know, she doesn't smile much. She gets out there and she hustles, and she's not the only one. You know what I mean? But you get her off the court, she's the nicest person. You don't have to lose yourself, but at the same time, unless you're hungry that way, it's not going to happen as a pro player. But
Yeah, there's
the events.
no doubt about it. I mean, there's nobody that I personally respected more than my competitors. When I was
Yeah,
playing to be the best player in the world, whether it was Cliff or Ellie or Jason, or Tim Doyle or whoever you want to say. But that respect showed in the way I went about it because I wanted to beat them. And, I mean, even Ellie will tell you, Cliff would be insulted if you even tried to be cordial or tried to be,
or he
patting
hates
him on
me.
the ass. Well,
He hates
there's,
me.
and
He
I
hates me
understand,
for
and
that.
we could go on and on, but I also, and I'm not the only one that thinks it's a lot better for television and interest and for production when you feel that sense and that tension and you feel that fight and competitiveness. So, Freddie, we can go on and on. This was awesome. I can tell you that it was definitely an important conversation
Yeah.
because the early numbers are really good. Ellie and I really, really, and Scotty Mack appreciate you being here. Is there any final words you wanna leave beyond the court with?
No, man, other than like, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I think, for the sport, there needs to be more stuff like this. I think you guys can get way more creative on what you're doing. But then again, baby steps, right? It's like, you just got your first sponsor. That's a huge deal, and it's like moving in these kinds of areas and trying to figure out, okay, how can we create engagement that will lead to something really substantial is really important. So like, I thank you guys for that. Thank you for this platform. It's like, I'm gonna keep following you guys, and like, if there's anything I could do for you guys already know that, and we're gonna keep talking. And anybody out there that's listening, all my friends or whatever, I didn't look at the comments or whatever, but
Go back,
talk,
go back and check them out.
go do your thing, man. I'll see everybody out there, and you know everybody, man. And Scotty Mack, yo, thank you. Because it's like, it's really important. That's one thing that I really learned on the tours too, that you have to have people like Scotty that are willing to go out and kind of like do this stuff. And you guys don't see his face, but it's really important. And there are a lot of guys like him out there. So it's like, if you're an organization, that's another thing. It's like, I'm not a big person for like looking for talent within something. I'm a big feeler. I'm a big believer in looking outside and pulling talent in. But when you have talent, those are the guys that you kind of want to get in a room and say, hey, what can you do? Can you do this? You can do that. You can do this. You can do that. There's a lot of guys in racquetball like that right now. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a glass half full guy. So.
Yeah, a lot of guys and gals that can do that. So hopefully they're inspired by conversations like this to do more than they're doing now, and then they think they can do. So hey, good luck at the one wall
Thank you,
there
man.
in Florida. I'm sure you're going down there to play a little. I hope you are
Well,
at least.
yeah, let's hope that things don't get
Yeah,
bad, because right now
right.
it doesn't look good, But right now it's like, I'm more about kind of like, okay, let's see what we could do with the players that we
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
I'll be texting you here in the next couple days, Freddie. We'll
All right,
talk about
man.
New York. Thanks, brother.
Later,
Thanks,
later,
See you
Freddie.
soon.
guys. I appreciate you guys.
You too, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We do too. Ellie, well, there you have it. That was Freddie Ramirez, the Restrung Mag guy. Scotty Mack, he got a lot of credit, which he deserves, Scotty Mack. We always tell you, and Ellie and I always want Scotty Mack to show his face and say hello. That was a super interesting conversation. And let me tell you, we're able to kind of keep up, and Scotty Mack keeps up with the numbers and stuff. There was a lot of interest in that show.
Yeah, there certainly was. It was a fun show. A lot of topics that we thought we would get into, we did. So that's great. I still have a whole bunch of questions
Yeah.
for Freddie that will go unanswered for a little while here, but we'll save the file there. And if we have a part two, and we kind of say that about our best guests, right? Like, that last Kane interview was great. Part two, Cliff interview was great. Paola interview was great. Rhonda interview was pretty good. Put Freddie right in there. Todd Boss was really interesting. So, I think it was a great choice for us to have Freddie on. Made a lot of sense. And, we're going to continue to follow Restrung Magazine and read some interesting articles as we get into 2021 and seeing where racquetball goes from there. And good topic tonight.
Yeah, it was good call. He has some really interesting perspective, and just want to say before we go again, KWM Gutterman, Keith Miner, thank you so much. If anybody else is out there that's interested in being part of Beyond the Court, you can reach out to me, sudsy@sudsy.com. You could message me, you could message the guys, whatever it is. We're going to keep doing what we do, but it definitely helps and makes it easier when you guys take part in this. So thank you again. We will see you next Sunday. We'll see you next Sunday. We don't know who the guest is yet. Nope. We love it. We want you to tell us, give us feedback. We have conversations, for days and sometimes weeks, and we just try to pick out that guest that we think that you, the fans, the players, the community will enjoy. We'll continue to do that next week, next Sunday, episode 24, Beyond the Court. We'll see you then. Have a great night and talk to you soon.